Tony Stark built over 80 suits from Iron Man all the way to Endgame, each one an upgrade over the last, more powerful, more advanced, and more sophisticated than its predecessor. But here's the baffling part. Despite knowing that Vibranium is the strongest metal on Earth, and knowing about it since Phase 1, he never once built a suit from it. Why? Why would the genius who obsessively pursued stronger, smarter armor deliberately avoid the most powerful metal in existence? Especially when even the Mark 50 suit he used in Infinity War and Endgame was developed with Wakandan technology. I believe I've finally uncovered the answer, and it all comes down to a single, shocking flaw in Vibranium that no one ever talks about. But before we get there, to truly understand why Tony never built a suit using Vibranium, we need to answer two crucial questions. 1. Will Wakanda really let Tony Stark get his hands on Vibranium? And second, could Tony Stark really afford it? Or was even he out of his league this time? Let's start with the first question. Would Wakanda let Tony have access to Vibranium? Being straightforward, in Phase 1, Wakanda definitely wouldn't have let Tony, or any outsider, use it. Wakanda was fiercely protective of its resources and completely distrusted outsiders. Besides, back then, Tony didn't even know using Vibranium was a possibility. At that time, Wakanda was still a closed nation, and the only known source of Vibranium was Captain America's shield, believed to be one of a kind. That meant there was no real supply Tony could access, no secret stockpile he could use to craft his suits. It wasn't until Phase 2, more specifically Age of Ultron, that Vibranium truly entered the MCU spotlight. And this is where things get interesting, because in that movie, Tony learns about Wakanda's Vibranium deposits for the very first time. But here's the wild part. The moment Ultron comes online, Tony's own creation, his first move isn't world domination or building an army. It's hunting down Vibranium, and not just a small amount. He wanted enough to forge himself an entirely new body and power the massive reactors that almost tore Sokovia off the face of the Earth. Unfortunately for Ultron, the Avengers saved the day, and his defeat meant something huge. The Vibranium that made up his body didn't just vanish. As Thanos would put it, it wasn't reduced to atoms. It was still out there, intact and up for grabs, free for anyone bold enough to claim it. And Tony knew that. He knew exactly where to find it. This should have been the perfect opportunity for Tony to claim the Vibranium for himself, to upgrade his armor to a level of power the world had never seen before. After all, he just witnessed firsthand how it took him, Thor, and even the combined blast of the Mind Stone just to leave a scratch on Ultron's Vibranium body. And yet he didn't. Why? Why didn't Tony seize the chance to build the ultimate suit? When you really think about it, there's a surprisingly logical reason behind his choice. There's a very good chance that either Wakanda or the United Nations reclaimed the Vibranium from Ultron's body after Age of Ultron. After all, Ultron had nearly destroyed the world with it, proving to the Wakandans that outsiders couldn't be trusted with their most sacred resource, and to the United Nations that the Avengers were definitely a threat. Timing also played a huge role. Right after the Sokovia incident, the Avengers were already under heavy scrutiny from governments around the world, pressure that eventually led straight into civil war. And Tony was the one pushing hardest for accountability, willing to sacrifice the Avengers' freedom if it meant preventing another Ultron-level catastrophe. The last thing he wanted at that point was to be caught hoarding stolen Vibranium, especially from the very machine he created, the one that caused all that destruction in the first place. But then, something unexpected happened. Just 1 week after the events of Civil War, the story of Black Panther unfolded. And with it, Wakanda made a decision that changed the MCU forever. The once secretive nation opened its borders to the world. For the first time in history, Vibranium was no longer locked away, and the metal entered a new era, an era where Tony Stark could finally get his hands on it, now that it was officially on the market. Think about what that means. This was 2 full years before Infinity War. More than enough time for Tony to acquire Vibranium and design an entirely new armor. And these weren't just any 2 years. They were arguably the most crucial years of Tony's life. After Civil War, the Avengers were fractured. The team was broken. But Tony's obsession with protecting Earth didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger. Alone like never before, he needed something far beyond anything he'd built to truly safeguard the world. And at first glance, Vibranium seemed like the obvious answer. After all, we've all seen how Wakandan technology is decades, maybe even centuries, ahead of anything else on the planet. And while Shuri's genius plays a huge part in that, Vibranium is the real reason their tech feels almost alien compared to ours. And to add to that, by the end of Civil War, Tony and T'Challa were allies. The idea of a strong working relationship between them shouldn't come as a surprise at all. So logically, using Wakandan technology would have been the perfect next step for Tony, right? So why didn't he use it? Here's where it gets really interesting. Tony did use those 2 years to build a suit far superior to anything he'd ever created before. The Mark 50. But here's the funny part. The nanotech suit wasn't built by Tony alone. According to the book The Wakanda Files, released in 2020, the Mark 50 was developed with the help of Wakandan technology. And when you think about it, that makes perfect sense. Sure, Tony was a genius, maybe the genius, but even he couldn't have created a fully functional nanotech suit entirely from scratch. That kind of technological leap could only come from one place, Wakanda. By the way, if you want to check out the Wakanda files for yourself, I left the link for you down in the description. Watching the movies is amazing, but if you want access to extra information like the one I just revealed, this book is essential. It's an official Marvel book that dives deep into Tony Stark's armor designs, Wakandan tech, and classified Avengers intel, including how the Mark 50 was actually developed with Wakandan technology. And just so you know, that link is an affiliate link, which means if you decide to grab the book, I might earn a small commission at no extra cost to you. But trust me, it's completely worth it. Extra material like this truly complements everything you know about the MCU movies. That's exactly how I started spotting hidden connections and details that most fans completely miss. So if you want that same deeper understanding of the Marvel Universe, don't skip this one. But as I was saying, in other words, Tony actively sought help from Wakanda because he recognized just how advanced their technology was. But here's what really raises questions. Why nanotechnology and not vibranium? I mean, if T'Challa was willing to let Tony use Wakandan tech, the most advanced technology on the planet, it's hard to imagine why he wouldn't have done the same with vibranium, the very heart of Wakanda's power. At first glance, it seemed like nothing could stand in his way. But here's the twist. Was it really that simple? Or was there still one massive obstacle standing in his way? Since vibranium was the strongest and rarest metal on Earth, could its value have been the real obstacle for Tony Stark? That brings us to the second question. Could Tony Stark actually afford vibranium? Sounds ridiculous, right? I mean, we're talking about Tony Stark, the genius billionaire playboy philanthropist. Money shouldn't be a problem for him, right? But when it comes to vibranium, things aren't that simple. Remember, we're not just talking about any material. We're talking about the strongest and rarest metal on Earth. And the rarer and more in demand something is, the higher its price climbs. In vibranium's case, we're talking about values that reach astronomical levels, far beyond anything Tony ever used in his suits. So, to figure out if Tony could afford to build a suit out of vibranium, we first need to estimate just how much this rare metal is actually worth. Although the movies never spell out vibranium's exact value, there's enough evidence to give us a solid estimate. In Black Panther, we learn from T'Chaka that Ulysses Klaue once stole a quarter ton of vibranium. When that flashback plays, we can actually see 50 canisters, meaning each one weighs about 5 kilograms. Fast forward to Avengers Age of Ultron. When Klaue tells Ultron about the remaining stock, you can clearly count that only 15 canisters are left. That's just 75 kilograms of vibranium in total. Now here's where it gets really intriguing. Ultron buys all 75 kilograms of vibranium to build his new body. And in one scene, the messages he sends to Klaue show a payment of $2.6 billion. But if you look closely before that, inside Ultron's system, a different number appears for $0.5 billion. This tells us that vibranium is worth $4.5 billion for just 75 kilograms. That equates to approximately $60,000 per gram. Considering that Tony's suits weigh around 100 pounds, that's about 45,000 grams. So, if vibranium cost $60,000 per gram, then building a full 100-pound vibranium Iron Man suit would cost Tony roughly $2.7 billion. Stack that against Stark Industries' estimated net worth of $80 billion. That's enough to build nearly 80 full vibranium suits. In other words, money simply wasn't the obstacle. And here's the kicker. Once Wakanda opened its borders and vibranium hit the global market, its value naturally dropped even further. So, if money was ever a concern, it certainly wasn't anymore for Tony. But here's the real mystery. If money wasn't the problem and access wasn't the problem, then what was? This is where Tony's decision to not use vibranium starts to reveal a shocking truth. Because there's only one thing that could have kept him from ever using vibranium in his armor. And that brings us to the final and most shocking revelation. The hidden, critical flaw in vibranium itself. If there's one thing we know about Tony Stark, it's that he constantly learns from his mistakes. Sure, it's become kind of a meme at this point. I even made a whole video about it, which you can check out in the description. But it's true. This pattern has been evident since his very first movie. In Iron Man 1, when he realized that alloy steel started icing up at high altitudes, he didn't hesitate. He switched to a gold titanium alloy, or something even simpler. When Tony was captured in Afghanistan, he had no way to contact anyone, and no one could even find him. From that moment on, he started installing GPS trackers in all his suits. And that decision paid off years later with Spider-Man's suit. During the ferry scene in Homecoming, that tracker was the only reason Tony was able to step in just in time to save Peter and everyone else on that ferry. So that raises the question, if Tony's always learning, always upgrading, why didn't he ever use vibranium in his suits? I mean, T'Challa's suit had incredible versatility, something Tony desperately craved, as we saw with the Mark 50 nanotech armor. It could instantly form around the wearer, adapting to every movement and attack, just like Tony's suit. But there's one crucial difference between them, and it's the very reason Tony never built his armor out of vibranium. Vibranium has one major weakness. When exposed to supersonic waves, it loses its durability and can even shatter. That's exactly what we see in the final moments of Black Panther. It's how T'Challa manages to overpower Killmonger. And Tony, being the genius he is, would never design armor around a flaw that dangerous. Even with unlimited resources, Tony never chased the rarest material. He chased the smartest idea. If he had built a full vibranium suit, he would have had to counter its weakness by making it rigid, crafted from solid plates like his earlier designs. But that kind of armor comes with a huge trade-off. It sacrifices flexibility, and Tony's entire fighting style depended on adaptability. That's why he moved toward nanotechnology instead. Sure, a vibranium suit might have been stronger on paper, but it could never match the Mark 50's versatility. The Mark 50 wasn't just armor, it was a revolution. It could adapt, regenerate, and move with a level of fluidity no metal could ever replicate. In the end, the Mark 50 nanosuit didn't just fix the flaws of Tony's previous designs. It surpassed vibranium itself, becoming the ultimate evolution of his genius. But now I want to hear from you. Do you think Tony should have built a vibranium suit anyway, despite its flaw? And if he had, do you think he could have found a way to fix vibranium's weakness? Let's talk about it in the comments. And if you want to check out the video about the top 10 times Tony learned from his mistakes, I've left it right here for you. Can't wait to see you there.